We are interviewing Anthony F. Rossi in Albany, New York, on the 25th of May, 2010, at 2:15 p.m. He entered the United States Navy April 6, 1945, and was discharged July 10, 1946. June and Kenneth Hunter are doing this interview. Please tell us your full name and when and where you were born.
Name, Anthony F., as in Francis, Rossi, born at 49 Madison Avenue, Albany, New York, March 25th, 1927.
And what did you do before you entered the service?
Well, grade school, high school, worked part-time, various things, stock boy in a supermarket for a while, and spent a couple of years from my sophomore year to my senior, almost to the beginning of my senior year, until I turned 17 in my senior year, working at a Port Orange riding stable up on Western Avenue, caressing and manicuring horses and becoming an expert in wielding a 10-tine fork like you wouldn't believe. And then when I turned 17 and got my driver's license, then I got a job delivering special delivery mail with the little red mail cars that used to tear around the city of Albany. And I did that until in between that, and I did one semester at Siena College from September to December, till I finally convinced my folks to sign the papers to let me go in, because if they didn't, I was going to get drafted and I was going to wind up in some foxhole somewhere. And I did not want to sleep out on the cold, wet, miserable ground, sharing it with 44,000 different insects. So that was why I joined the Navy, incidentally.
So you know where you were sleeping at night.
I figured I'd have a bunk and maybe a couple of meals a day that I could rely on. Somebody said to me, what if your ship sinks? Well, I'll have to swim, that's all there is to it.
So can you tell us where you entered the service and a little bit about your basic training?
Well, April 6th, we had sworn in down at the post office, the old post office on Broadway in Albany, myself and about 40 or 50 other guys. Slept overnight at the YMCA on North Pearl Street, breakfast at a little diner next to the old Albany Hardware and Iron store on State Street, and then from there onto the train and up to Sampson, New York, which is long gone, which today it happens to be Sampson State Park. Okay. We were shipped up there. As we were going through Auburn, New York, we go right past the train, went right past the Auburn State Prison, and we thought that we were going to go, that was going to be our home. We didn't know anything about the prison, but we wound up at Sampson, and we were there for 10 weeks. 10 weeks learning all the various things you learn in the Navy, you know, marching, exercise, and so forth and so on. And
what kind of quarters did you have?
what kind of quarters? They were two-story barracks, and probably 120 guys to each floor. So we were in E unit, I think barracks number 25. I'm not quite sure of that. And we were on the second floor, and we were in what they call a DP unit, a dental prosthetic unit, where everybody that had problems with their teeth, boom, that's where you went, in E unit. I didn't have any problems with my teeth. So, but how I wound up in there, I did. I had two teeth that had to have, the dentist decided I need to have drilled out. And he drilled them all right. He broke 2 bits on the drill, got mad, and turned around and took a little fine steel chisel, had his assistant, the wave, hold my jaw while he took the chisel and a ball peen hammer, whack, 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 one here, one on each side of the lower jaw. Punched them out, filled them up, and that was the end of that. I told a civilian dentist about that. He says, they didn't do that, and you better believe it. So,
What was a typical day like during basic training?
well, you were rousted out before breakfast, of course, early, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And the first thing you did, you got up, you got dressed, you assembled outside, and then they had you run what they called the grinder, the paved pathway all around the E unit, which was 1 mile all around. So you ran that, came in, did your toiletry, got yourself all spruced up, then it was up for breakfast. And then after that, depending on where you were going, whether you were going for a physical workout like you did anyhow, or if you were on a work week, a couple of work weeks, that you were assigned to galley duty, which we were now. He had enough pull, he got us off of that, and when our 2 work weeks came up, we went for regimental guard duty. And of course, my favorite watch, as I've learned in the Navy, was noon to 4 p.m. or midnight to 4 a.m. Never failed. They're in a board ship too. But that was it. Then we went for, as I said, one of the things he insisted upon was that we learned hand-to-hand combat, and he was a black belter in a couple of different formats. And he had us up 6 days a week for 2 hours a day, up in the big gym, on the tumbling mats, learning all the different maneuvers that you would learn. And he didn't call it judo or jujitsu. He called it he says it was judo combined with American catch-as-catch-can, and so forth and so on. And that
Did you ever have an opportunity to use it during your service time?
Yeah, there were a couple of times. There was a couple of times where you get into some trouble, and I decided after that, especially after I got married, and we had our little first child. She was about 3 years old, and I came to the conclusion the little girls will be beautiful, gorgeous, but they can be snippy. And she got me mad one time, and I took a swat at her bottom. Never at the. In fact, I never made it a rule never to hit the kids, any kid. And I caught her. Instead of with an open hand slap, at the last minute, my hand turned and caught her right across the seat. Fortunately, it just swept her feet out from under her, and I stopped, and I said to my wife, I might yak at the kids, I said, but I'll never ever raise a hand to any of our kids, if we have any more, to any kids again. And I never have.
Yeah,
Because I found out that, and this was years later, that training, when you get mad, that training will come back on you. So, anyhow.
when you
So
got-
the basic training, how long did it last, and what happened when basic training ended?
Well, it was 10 weeks. And we went in April, and we were finished by mid-June. You had 6 days off, you went home. You had boot leave. Came back, and then you went into the OGU, the outgoing unit. Well, as soon as you get in the outgoing unit, they have on the bulletin board in your barracks that you're in, they list every day the draft notices of where your draft is going, where you're going to be sent. So the very first day I was back, I looked, and there's a draft notice with about 300 guys. Shoemaker, California. Shoemaker, California was the amphibious training base, and they were getting ready. You go out there, you're going to get trained for either Okinawa or Japan. So I go in to check in with the Master at Arms, and he says, your name is scratched. You're not on that draft. You're done. I said, what do I do now? He said, just wait till the next one comes up. So, okay. So then the next thing I know, I'm on a working party, and they took us for 5 days down to the whaleboats, across Seneca Lake to Penyan, and Dresden and Penyan, and DuPont was building a factory over there, a chemical plant factory. So we went over there, and I ran into a schoolmate of mine. As I'm going out, he's coming in, and he said, "Where are you going?" I told him. He says, "Look," he says, "you're going to get over there. There's going to be 100 of you." He says, "The chief is going to ask for a volunteer." He says, "Step right out." He says, "Don't wait. You got a buddy? Two of you, step right out immediately." I says, "Ray, if you're steering me wrong, I'm going to catch up to you." No. He says, "Do it." So we did. We stepped right out when he called for the volunteers. Everybody else hung back. He says, "Okay, you two, this is what you're going to do." He says, "You see that truck over, that small truck, what they call the weapons carrier type?" He says, "There is tanks on it, and there's insulated buckets." He says, "Every day you fill those things up with water and ice. And here's a map, and on the map, all around this construction project, there are these containers, ceramic containers. You fill them up with ice and water. That's all you do." Terrific. And that's all we did for 5 days. The other guys were out there with picks, shovels, 30-pound tamping hammers, and all the rest of it. I ran into Ray down in Guantanamo Bay several months later. It was January or February. He was on the Fargo. I ran into him in one of the beer halls, and I told him, "Ray, you were right, and you were great," and we had several beers together. And I thanked him for that.
That's the first good volunteer thing we've heard.
Yeah, but then the second week comes along, and of course Monday morning you get out, and they grabbed 100 of us and they loaded us into the truck, and I said, "Oh, maybe we're going back to Dresden or Penyan." All the way down to the end of the base. Sheds are there, open them up. He said, "Okay, get yourself a 10-tine fork, wheelbarrow, boots. Put the boots on, grab the fork, and the one with the fork goes in. The one with the wheelbarrow goes after him and loads up and then wheels it out." And I look, sanitary evaporation pits. That's what we were looking at. And we had to go in and muck those things out for 5 days. And the weather turned hot. And the big green flies came in and boom. And when we went up for lunch at the mess hall, we were the pariahs of the mess hall. They would march us in, run down through the line, and they always kept us till the last. Go down through the line, get your food, and then over to a section of the mess hall where nobody could see, hear, or smell us, especially smell. And that's what we did for 5 days. The 5th day, after we used to come back to the barracks, walk in. Of course, you got your regular shoes on. You had to take the boot. You got rid of the boots down there. Drop the boots off, drop the shoes off at the bunk. Just grab my towel, right into the shower, turn the shower on, clothes them all, scrub from head to foot with the clothes on, then throw the clothes off and then scrub some more. I think it took me a month to get the smell of those septic tanks out of those sanitation tanks out of my nostril. But yeah. So anyhow, then the following Monday morning, there was the draft notice. Myself and there's 30 of us, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, radar school, and I asked the petty officer, I said, "What's radar?" "I don't know, but I heard it might be a good deal." So that was that. So that was when we went down, we got shipped down, and we picked up a bunch of guys from the base down. The Navy had a base at Bainbridge, Maryland, training base. We picked up another gang there and another gang at Washington. Wound up about 120 of us were in there. And the first thing they told us when we got there at assembly the next morning in the assembly hall, he said, "You're here, and these are your hours. 1st, 3rd, and 5th week, 8 in the morning till 10 at night." He said, "We're going to, 2nd and 4th week, 6 in the morning till 8 at night. We're going to jam a year and a half of science and math into you in that time. and also learn how to operate the machines. He said, you miss one test, you miss one class, you will be immediately transferred. Shoemaker, California. Oh no.
What was it, Shoemaker, California?
The Amphib Training Base again. There, that one's popped up again. So I said, oh. And I used to, years later, when I was got in the insurance business and I had trainees, and I used to tell them, what you need to be a success is an incentive. I says, and that was my, I told them that story. I said, that was my incentive. I did not want to go to Shoemaker to be a deck ape on a landing barge. So anyhow, as I said, 120 of us started, and by the third week, 41 of us survived, and 41 of us graduated. And then on graduation, they split us. 20 went to the Marine Corps. The other 21, myself included, went to the fleet. And that was that. And then from there, we went up to Newport. And was in Newport. I was in Newport. Oh, we got there just before VJ Day, in fact. Big party. About a week before VJ Day. And then we...
And what was the mood like when people heard of the surrender?
The base, the city of Newport, went crazy. The only thing was, the orders came out immediately. Everybody's going on liberty, except all petty officers will have to report your shore patrol. Oh, geez, they're not going to be too happy. But Newport in those days was a city of about 30,000 people, and it was a dump. And 90,000 sailors. So you can imagine what it was like. And I didn't go back there for years and years afterwards, until finally a friend of ours they invited us down to Newport for a weekend for our 25th wedding anniversary. And I said, I don't want to go to Newport. He said, when was the last time you were there? And I told him, 45. He said, you won't recognize it. And they did. We found out that Newport was terrific. We enjoyed it. And we've been back there many times since. So. But anyhow, so as I said, I was in their unit, the loose unit for a couple of weeks, and then I got assigned to Princeton. The first part of September, I think it was. I got assigned to the carrier Princeton, and then we went to the Fargo building in Boston for CIC training at the Combat Information Center. And the Fargo building was a totally different world. It was a big, I don't know if you're familiar with it, well, downtown Boston, there were only a few blocks from the South Station. And it's a fact, it was a big warehouse building. It was about 8 stories tall. And we were building it up there. We had liberty every night, liberty every weekend, classes from 8 till 4. The food was terrific. And we were supposed to be there 6 weeks. I was there 10 days. And our officer, Lieutenant Morgan, came in on a Monday morning, and he said, before we started, he said, we have an announcement. I have an announcement. He said, the following men, and then he ran off 11 names. Mine was the 10th name. Whipple was number 11. He says, you will immediately get your seat bags, which we were living out of, many of them, and report down on the quarterdeck, the main floor. He says, your orders will take you, will go up to the South Station, and your orders will tell you where you go from there. So 11 of us went out of there, did what we were supposed to do, got down to Washington, D.C., what, 8, 10, 12 hours later, whatever. Yeah, 9 o'clock at night, in fact. We got down to Washington, D.C., and we were laid over for a few hours, and then Whipple, who was the second-class petty officer in charge of us, he got the further orders that we were heading for Ocracoke, North Carolina. And Ocracoke is an island 30 miles off the coast. It's just below Hatteras. And that's where we were going. And that's where we went. And we took the Washington, D.C. We were there for about 3 hours. Broke up in a little group. Myself and a couple of the other guys were walking up the street. I heard this whistling. I couldn't think anything of it. Then we heard it again. Just out, turned around, the three of us looked. There were 3 young women behind us. They were whistling at us. I said, wow, that's a first. But Washington being that the ratio from what I heard was women to men was like about 15 to 1. And so men were very short-handed. They see 3 loose sailors running around. So they took us and they escorted us around, showed us some of the sights. We were about 3 hours, then back to the station, and we all took off. And all the guys that were wandering around, loose, out of the group, they all had a couple of girls on their arms when I came back, too. It was funny. It really broke me up. But anyhow, we went down, and many, many hours later, they lost up our orders, and instead of sending us to Rocky Mount and Washington, they dropped us off at Wilson, and they had a jitney bus waiting for us. You know, one of these little things that the kids ride in, the kindergarten and first-year-old. So that's what was waiting for us. There were 11 of us, and then 11 from another ship called the Pocono, GC-13. You're familiar with that one.
I was stationed on it.
Huh?
I was stationed on it.
Were you really?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the GC-13 was new in those days, and the crew, from radar guys from the Poke, and from there we went 125 miles to Atlantic, North Carolina, got there late at night, and they had a landing craft, an LCVP, and a crash boat. Well, I'm watching the guys loading into the landing craft. I said, I may be young, I may be dumb, but I'm not that dumb. And I waited and I piled into the crash boat, which was a semi-enclosed cabin cruiser, and we went 30 miles out. And of course, what did we run into with a nor'easter coming in? The coxswain on the landing on the LCVP was drunk. He falls overboard, and we look back and we see all of a sudden the light comes on. And it wasn't supposed to. This thing is going around and around and around. So we went back and around looking for him. Black night, stormy as hell. The only thing that saved him was his life jacket had a Carly light on it. That, you know, when they get wet, they light up. And that's how we found him. Pulled him back aboard, stoned to the ears, and onto the base. And there we were in Ocracoke for 3 weeks about learning electronic radar jamming, mechanical and electronic both. And that was when they told us that one thing you cannot do, you can't surrender and you can't be captured. And if you're in either that type of a situation, your officer or petty officer will have bottle, and they showed it to us, cyanide. And if you don't take the cyanide, he's got the orders to take this 45 and 2 clips, one for each of you, one for himself. How do you get out of this chicken outfit? You don't, you're in. If you did, well, anyhow, but, and afterwards, years later on rather, when we finally got on the carrier, up in the radar countermeasure was separate. The cabinet was way up on the island, and even up there was a little cabinet with the cyanide and the 45 was still in it.
Which carrier was it?
Princeton, CV-37. That I was assigned to, that I went to. She replaced the other Princeton, CVL-23, which got sunk at the battle in the Surigao Strait. And our captain was the replacement captain, John Hoskins. was a replacement captain of the on the first Princeton, but they got hit by a dive bomber, and she caught fire. And anyhow, the ship blew up, and they had to sink her. And he lost his right foot, part of his right leg. They wanted to retire him. He was in his 40s, 45. And he argued the Navy board out of it. And he told him, he said, I think with my head, not with my feet. He said, and there were been various other captains that went on to do their job, even though they were missing part of their limbs. And that was it. In fact, when we got aboard the ship, Walt Disney designed an emblem for the ship. And you remember Peg Leg Pete? Well, there was Peg Leg Pete with machine gun in one hand and a torpedo in the other hand. And that was the emblem for our for the carrier under John Hoskins. And he went on to become admiral in charge of the 7th Fleet in Korea.
So then what was
I'll take a break.
Okay.
Bill.
On board the USS Princeton, what was a typical day like? What were your quarters like? Where was the mess hall? How are things? What kind of food did you receive?
Well, the thing that surprised us at first is when after we got back to Boston from Ocracoke, we went down to Philadelphia, of course, to the Princeton. And we got there, it was at nighttime. And into the Navy Yard, and we walked down. And there was the Princeton, all lit up. They were still working on her. She was still in dry dock. And the thing that surprised us was we got down there and come in head on and looked at it. And I looked up at it and I said, look at the size of that thing. It was huge. I've seen ships before, but never when you're right up close. Well, yeah. But she was still in the dry dock. They hadn't, so we went aboard. And our quarters, unlike everybody else aboard ship, except maybe the captain, our quarters were, we went up on the hangar deck, and then one deck up, they call it the gallery deck, and it was just before you hit the after, in fact, it was, our quarters were notched out to make room for the stern elevator, aircraft elevator, and you went up into that, and our quarters were to the right. You had room in there for 100 guys. The showers were, you went in, the door to the quarters were to the right, showers were to the left, and the latrine was around the corner. And we couldn't use the showers yet, we couldn't use the latrine because you're in dry dock and the workers are still underneath working on finishing up whatever they were doing down there. But we could sleep aboard. But if we wanted to use the facilities or we wanted to eat, we had to go off, and there was a building on the pier that had all this in there, including cooking and so cooking facility. At that particular point, the food was you know, all I can say is institutionalized food. The quarters were fine. You went in, you got yourself a bunk, and most of the bunks were tiered. I think there were 4 high. I'm not quite sure now if I can remember that. 4 or 5 high, 5 high, and there were a couple of them where, as we found out, where they were only 2 high or 3 high, and the reason being was we were right directly beneath the number 3 and number 4 5-inch gun turrets. And when they were firing, as we learned later on, to our surprise and dismay, the exhaust chutes for the shells, instead of dropping them out onto the flight deck, they came down through these tubes. Not straight down, the tubes that come through down alongside the bulkhead, they come down at an angle, bend at another angle, and then make the third bend. So it was bang, 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 when a 5-inch casing went down through there. Other than that, the quarters were okay. And we had portholes. we had porthole because we were above the hangar deck. We were very elite. The only other quarters that were up there with us was down on the other side of the latrine. Was if an admiral came aboard with his staff would go down on the other side of us. But we only had an admiral once, and he stayed about 3 days, and he went to the Pocono. He liked it better over there. But that was the quarters. As I said, we didn't eat until finally the ship was floated, which was about 5 days later after we got, when she was, got ready for christening, when she was christened November 18th. Then they floated her out of there and took us to, from Dry Dock 4, we went to Pier 4. And they had the christening ceremonies. And a few days after that, shoo, off we went.
What about loading supplies and munitions?
We did that down, we went down to Norfolk, Virginia for that one. And for loading supplies, we went into Norfolk, and then we went up to Yorktown. And that was where we loaded supplies and ammunition. And that was when, in the course of loading supplies and ammunition, they dropped the torpedo warhead. Broke loose and dropped between the lighter and the ship's hull down into the bottom. And they had to get the divers down there to get that damn thing the hell out of there. Because what do you got? A 600-pound warhead rattling around loose on the bottom, and if the ship ever came down on top of it, they figured it might set it off. Not a good idea. Well, yeah, that's what happened there. And we were in Norfolk until we got ammo and supplies aboard. Then we went out, and we were going out early in the morning, fog. Pilot was taking us out. We're on the radar, judging where we're going and marking our spots, and we kept calling up, reporting to the bridge that we're getting too close to the shore on the north, it was on the northeast shore. We're getting too close. Pilot knew just where he was going. It's foggier than hell out there. And all of a sudden, everything stopped. We ran aground. Yeah, we ran aground, but good. And they finally had to bring down 20-odd seagoing tugs to pull us off. We couldn't get off. We had to turn right around, go right back up to Philadelphia because the divers went down, checked the hull. The hull was okay, but our 4 screws were all chewed to pieces. We went back up. I got back up to Philly on Friday evening, had Liberty. Monday morning, we're ready to go. And I figure when we looked at the Sunday night, and I'm looking at the screws, the 4 damaged screws are laying on the pier, and there were chunks missing out of those screws that I could stand inside the notch of the blade and fit. That's how big they was, where the hell did they get this new screw so fast? And I looked over. Sister ship, the Valley Forge, is sitting there wasn't completed yet. 4 screws from the Valley Forge. I bet you wound up on the Princeton. The Valley Forge got commissioned several months later.
So then you went out to sea for trials?
Then we went out to sea for trials. Bypassed Norfolk this time. And away we went out to sea, and we were out in the Atlantic, and then it got too blustery, and the pilots were not too happy trying to fly. Of course, they flew our planes in first, and then they were not too happy trying to fly out in the North Atlantic in December, so we went south. We went down into the Caribbean, and operated in and out of there, and then out into the Atlantic and back into the Caribbean until May of '46, we came up to New York for Armed Forces Day. And the 7th Fleet came in. And we were there with, Wisconsin and Missouri, and I think the Midway, and I forget who else, but we were all there. And we were there for a week. Then they sent us, after we left there, south, Guantanamo again, Panama, Guantanamo, Port of Spain, Trinidad, Panama Canal. And we went through the canal, then we were out in the Pacific for a month before we finally wound up at San Diego.
Now, did you have any unusual duties when the aircraft came on board? Were you given a special assignment?
Well, yeah, I got tagged with a couple of things. One was that the skipper wanted to find, the captain wanted to find out how fast we could launch and recover aircraft. And of course, and surprisingly enough, we were flying an awful lot. They said, of course, the captain, being a pilot himself, had been a pilot himself. He wanted his planes in and out of there as fast as you could get them. So somebody had to be up on the bow recording and on the stern recording. So they grabbed myself and another guy and told us that we would be the landing recorders in the catwalk. And we were equipped with helmets, life jackets, field glasses, and a clipboard. And we had to, when the planes were coming in, we had to write the number of the plane down, which you could see because when the wheels are down, the front of the flap on them has got the plane number painted right on it. So you would record the plane and time it. You had to stop. We had a stopwatch, and you time it as to when he got into the landing pattern, the upward leg of the landing pattern. The LSO was guiding him.
What's the LSO?
Landing signal officer. Sorry. And he would come in, and if he made his landing, what wire he picked up, arresting gear wire he picked up, how far it would stretch out, unhook through the crash barriers, and then when was the next plane. What they were trying to do was get them down, bringing them in 15 seconds apart, and get them out of there that fast. They were launching them 10, 15 seconds. I mean, one guy would be going down the deck, and the next one would be winging it, right behind him. Because as I mentioned, the John Hoskins, the captain, having been on the Princeton CVL-23 when she got hit, and it got hit by the dive bomber, the Jap dive bomber. So anyhow, we did that, myself and the other guy. The first station we picked, or he picked, was right behind the number 4 5-inch gun turret. So I was up there. It was my week to be on, and I was there. And one of the planes came in, made a bad landing, blew a tire, swerved, and came right towards where I was at, a few hundred feet away. And I'm ready to try to dive through a hatch, and there's two jokers are there that shouldn't be there, because the catch was supposed to be cleaned of extraneous help, no sightseeing, and they were jammed in there. I thought, oh boy, I almost panicked for a second, and I said, oh hell. With that, I grabbed the edge of the flight deck, the flange on it, leaped up in the air with both feet, and came right down into their backs, and drove them right through drove them right in through the hatch, me in and on top of them. And as I'm going in, letting go this way, there goes the wheel and the wing and the prop of the plane, tearing up the catwalks right. So, when I had to reestablish myself, I went back on the catwalk, all the way to the stern, and I'm directly opposite the LS, the landing signal officer, on the opposite side of the deck, and I found a little hatch, a little opening there with a platform underneath it. It was a foam fighting platform. He's over there, I'm over here, I got the hatch, and there's a jack from my phone. I said, I'm here, I'm staying here, forget it. I'm not going back up by that. And that gun mount, that number 5-inch gun mount, got hit several times from planes blowing, swerving off. Didn't bother the gun mount at all. 5 inches of armored steel, nah.
Now, you had mentioned that a story about Christmas time, a very inspiring story.
Oh yeah, we were out What do you mean about, that was the one about,
Salvation Army.
oh yeah, that was the one where we were out to sea, and it was cold and miserable, of course, and we're still out in the Atlantic, and the send a couple of our torpedo bombers to the nearest port, wherever it was, to pick up mail and whatever else. And they came back, landed, and of course we were up in, some of us were up in the flight deck, waiting to see what they see about the mail bags and things. And we're watching them open the bilges and then unloading the bags out. And all of a sudden these cardboard boxes are coming out, like, well, maybe 3 by 3 foot boxes. What in the world are those things for? Well, they didn't open them, they just, down they went, and took them in. Something I found out later that I didn't know at that particular time, there was a little elevator on one side of the torpedo elevator, and they lowered them down in those torpedo elevators down to where they wanted to unload them. Well, anyhow, the next day, after chow, the crew was called that they would come down by units down to the chow hall, and they had the boxes down there. And as everybody, you went through the line, you were handed a sleeveless woolen sweater with a watch cap. And in the sweater was a little note, and it was from a woman that had contributed time and effort to the Salvation Army, wishing you a Merry Christmas. And it was the Salvation Army that had gotten these people all together to knit this, and they had shipped it out to us. And there was a sweater and a hat for everybody aboard our ship, plus our 2 destroyers. So you had probably, I don't know, it was well over 3,000. Well over 3,000 sweaters. And I've never forgotten the Salvation Army for that.
I imagine while you were on board the ship there were times when your destroyer escorts had to pull alongside for fueling.
Oh yeah.
What was the fueling situation like?
Well, 2 things. I can always remember 2 things coming out of that. One was the destroyers, of course, and it always seems like that when they were getting ready to refuel, it was always when the waters got the roughest. And they'd come up alongside of our starboard side, and the hoses would be transferred back and forth and hooked up to the destroyer, and then hooked up to our fueling pumps, which were right on the hangar deck level, but in a side compartment. And the strangest thing, right next to that refueling, where those refueling nozzles were, was the incinerator. That was right next door, and there was an open hatchway there. Whoever designed that one didn't have his hat on straight. Well, anyhow, we used to watch, and I used to feel sorry for the guys. They'd be up in the catwalks watching, and I'd feel sorry for the guys on the tin cans because waters would be rough. We'd be going along, not too fast, and the waves would come down and bounce off the side of the carrier and then hit the can, bury the bow of the can. And I remember that we had the 2 cans we had with us on the first run was a 713, and that was a Sumner class, 3 dual 5-inch 38s on it. The other one was the 800. I can't remember the names on them. The other one was the 800, and that was a Fletcher with the 5 single turrets. And it seems like with those waves would bury those 2 front turrets, right? Sometimes you wonder whether the bridge could see what was going on. But the other one was, we refueled from them. And then when we were refueling from one of the sea tankers, the big tankers, of course they're low in the water. Same thing, the waves are coming in and washing over the tanker. And I'm up on the flight, I was up on the catwalks watching this one day, the guy down in the tankers, he's getting real exasperated. Finally, he gets up on a higher spot, pulls up a bullhorn. Hey, how do you like shore duty up there? Okay, wave, thank you. But yeah, they used to get awful aggravated with us because we sat so tall in the water. That the wave, it took a lot to shake up an Essex class, but they have gotten shaken. Right. But we had some other things too.
Now, you mentioned that the Princeton went through the Panama Canal. What was it like going through there? Was there a lot of room to spare to go through?
We had to, when we went into Cristobal Colon, which is the Caribbean side. And we had to lay overnight. Of course, we had Liberty. And we had to lay overnight. And the reason being, they had to take the port side deck edge elevator and fold it up. And then on the starboard side, on the hangar deck level, the quad 40 gun tubs stuck out too far, and they'd have to remove the gun shields and pack them in. And then when you went through, you had about this much room. So even though the hull was 100 feet wide, but because of the other structures sticking out, and of course the locks are only 110. So that was what they had. That was why we laid over. And of course, being Cristobal, we had a little liberty. And I think I made a mention of it in there about going down the street, myself and my buddies, a couple of my buddies. And we were coming back to the ship actually. And we heard this hooting and hollering and yelling, and what the heck's going on? Turn around and I look, and here comes four swabbies running down the street towards us. And the four of them have got a stuffed alligator about 6 feet long. Each one's holding a leg. And the alligator's got a light bulb screwed into his nose. Where in the world did you get that stuff? Vroom! They go by and they're the Panama police, the Cristobal police, a couple of them are trotting along very leisurely, and then behind them is a short, heavy owner yelling in English and Spanish, "Stop thief, bing, bing, bing." You know, there's something funny about that. I told my friends, we've seen that gator before. Actually, it was a caiman. But a little while later, we're heading back to the ship, and we go by this shop, this gift shop. And there's the owner of the gift shop on a stepladder, hooking the alligator back up. It was his sign. And these four guys, you know, half bagged up, and they decided it'd be a nice play toy to have. But they didn't catch them. They must have dropped and zoom, and took off. But yeah, I'd always remember that one there. But then we went through the canal, and that is quite an experience because you go from sea level through the first lock and through the second lock, and by the time you're on the second top of the second lock, I'm standing on the stern of the flight deck, myself and the whole gang of guys, and we're looking back down this thing, and there, this flight deck is 70 feet off the water, and then here's the first lock, and then the second lock. We're a couple of 100 feet up in the air, and I was thinking, 30,000 tons, and they picked it up and lifted it all that distance. I said, that's quite an accomplishment. And then, of course, we couldn't use our own power because we drafted 32 feet, and we were afraid of chewing up the screws again. So they towed us through. It was about an 8 or 9 hour tow, and it was quite a sight to see. And then the other side was the Miraflores locks, and the same thing back down again, and then put the ship back together. Oh, the reason they folded up the deck edge elevator because, from what we heard, the story, when they built the canal, they put the street lights right alongside where the little donkey carts, the little donkey engines run. However, the first aircraft carrier that went through with a deck edge elevator sticking out, bing, 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 there went the lights. So, so after that, fold up the elevator and put the lights back in a little further away.
So after you passed through the canal, what was the duty like then, and where did you go to?
Well, duty like we were heading for Hawaii, and we were heading for Hawaii. But the funny part about that one was, as soon as we cleared Panama City, we got out about a mile, and all of a sudden the ship was going around and around and around in a circle. I said, what the heck's going on? And then the captain comes over the loudspeaker, and he said that we understand that everybody likes their pets and collecting pets and so forth. He says we have absolutely no room for pets aboard this ship. Get rid of them. We're close enough to shore that they'll make it to shore. He says, but get rid of the pets. Anybody caught with a pet will have to go to a deck court-martial and extra duty. You know, myself, we're up there watching. All of a sudden, oh, clouds of birds and everything, monkeys, and God knows what else, cats, dogs, over the side, but especially the birds. You should have seen them, all different types and sizes, and away they went, back to shore. Well, then after that, we headed out, heading for Hawaii, and made the loop, got our orders to come back to San Diego, because they had a special mission for the Princeton. She was going to take the body of Manuel Quezon, who had been the president of the Philippines when the Japanese took it over, and they were going to have the honor of transporting his body back to Manila. So we eventually wound up coming into San Diego, or not San Diego, Long Beach, and the Long Pier at Long Beach, and we came in, tied up behind an ACAC cruiser to Salt Lake City. There was another destroyer, there was a destroyer ahead of her, the Norman Scott, and then on the other side of the pier alongside of us was the Arkansas. Then we were there 24 hours. Oh, while we were there, we looked over and we could see the Spruce Goose over about 300-400 yards away.
Howard Hughes' airplane.
Huh?
That was Howard Hughes'
Yep.
airplane.
And we got off, and a bunch of us, we beat our way over. We couldn't get too close to it because they had a big fence around it. But we got within 100 yards of it, and we could see, what a monster. How in the heck did they get that thing off the way? But it flew. So we saw the Spruce Goose, and then next day we went out of there and went down to San Diego, pulled into San Diego, and on the 29th, and on the 30th, myself and a whole gang of guys were off the ship on the dock and heading for Camp Elliott and to be sent home. We didn't think we were going to go because this one officer swore that he was going to have us all in the brig, especially me, and Lieutenant Commander. That I went to my watch officer, Lieutenant J.G. McNulty, and told him about the threat, and he said, we'll see about that. And he went to Division Commander Clare, and Clare called me in and wanted to know about that. So I told him what had happened. He knew what had happened. Because when we pulled into Armed Forces Day, we were on our way up from Guantanamo, the Caribbean, and I was on the midnight to 4 a.m. I was leading seaman at that time, leading seaman of the watch, because we were short of petty officers. And he was sleeping on the cot in the CIC. I picked up a surface contact on the radar, and we tracked it, checked it, ran its course and speed, plotted ours, plotted theirs, come to find out we're on a collision course over a period if we kept going the way we're going. woke the lieutenant commander up and told him. And this lieutenant commander was a grounded flyboy and didn't want to be in the radar. So I told him about it. Oh, call me later. I said to him, the captain's always on the bridge, midnight to 4 a.m. I know he is. It's the way he couldn't. It's the way he is. So I called him again. Called him 3 times. All of a sudden, the squawk box lights up, and he said to him, wanted to know who was on watch. It was the skipper. Wanted to know who was on watch, etc., etc. Got Lieutenant Commander McDonald, and he wanted McDonald up on the bridge immediately. Well, somebody up there left the thing open, left the switch open. We had ours open. The old man chewed him up, but royally and regally. So when we got to New York City, he had the delightful duty of being shore patrol watch for all 7 days. For the 7 days they were there. He had no liberty, no recreation, and he had to report into the ship every couple of hours. And he swore he was going to have me and the whole first section in the brig.
So what was the separation process like for you how did you get back home?
We got off the ship on the 30th, took us up to Camp Elliott, kept us over, and on the 1st of July, loaded us on a train, and up we go to Los Angeles with all our gear. Get to Los Angeles, meet another bunch coming in from someplace else. There were 600 of us, and we said that oh, we're going to have nice train ride back. We did. A train of troop sleepers. You know what those things are. And so we got on the troop sleepers, and away we went. Well, we rattled here and there and across the United States to Chicago. It must have. Well, by the time we got to New York, to Lido Beach, Long Island, it was 7 days. 7 days going across the United States. At Lido Beach, they unloaded us, and in 3 days' time, slightly less than 3 days, they rushed us right through. And that's why I wrote this up, because when I look at my original sheet, on the back, the yeoman had put me down for being at Newport, Rhode Island from August through to December. I said, can't be. I was in three or four other places. He lost up the whole thing. I wrote to the Navy, and when I got back, it was a photocopy of the back sheet. I can't remember what they call it though. Same thing. I wrote back to them again. That's all we've got. Apparently, the Navy had a big fire out in St. Louis around 1950, and it burned up the records, and it took them quite a while to remake those records. So whatever happened to the travel vouchers and everything else, I don't know. Yeah, so my records were loused up, and that's what prompted me to get going and write this out.
Did you have any regrets of the service? Would you do it all over again?
My only regret was I couldn't get my parents to sign me up earlier, really, because I wanted to go in. Like a lot of the guys, in those days it was different than today. I wanted to go in right out of high school. I graduated in June. I wanted to be gone by July or August. But that's my biggest regret. When
you got back home, I imagine you said you had additional college. Did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did. I did it. I took advantage. I went back to Siena for another year. Then I went down to Manhattan College in New York, and I did another year down there. And so I had 2.5 years. And then my father got seriously ill. So I had just started, my junior year, and he got seriously ill. I was there. My brother was over at Fordham, the older brother, where he was in his senior year, finishing up his senior year, or starting his senior year. So we both left college and went back home.
Okay, well, this has been an interesting story, and we thank you very much for
Well.
serving the United States.
No, it's been my pleasure.